Every week, billions of people stop everything they are doing to watch 22 strangers chase a ball. This series presents the story of football through quiet storytelling, letting knowledge settle into you gently while you rest, cook, walk, or drift towards sleep. There is nothing here you need to grip tightly. Let the story move at its own slow pace and let it find its own way in. Think for a moment about how strange this really is. In a single weekend, more human beings will turn their attention toward a football pitch than toward any prayer, any election, any piece of news. A goal scored in one city can send a wave of joy rolling across continents, and a defeat can leave grown adults sitting in the dark with their heads in their hands, aching as if they had lost something they could never replace. Governments pour fortunes into it. Wars have brushed up against it. Dictators have wrapped themselves in it, hoping its glow would hide the blood on their hands. Entire cities measure their pride and their grief by the fortunes of 11 players in matching shirts. And yet, when you strip it all back, football is almost insultingly simple. A ball, a field, 2 goals, rules a child can learn in a single afternoon. So how did something so plain become one of the most powerful forces ever built by human hands? That is the question we are chasing tonight, and the answer is older and stranger than you might expect, because here is the first secret, the one that surprises almost everyone who hears it. Football was not invented in England. Not really. The game we know was shaped there, sharpened and written down there. But the hunger that football feeds is far, far older than any rule book. It is older than England, older than empires, older than writing itself. To understand how a chaotic street game became one of the most powerful institutions on Earth, we have to travel back thousands of years to a time before stadiums, before television, before the word football had ever been spoken aloud. We have to begin with something buried deep inside us, something that has been waiting, restless and patient, since before history began. So settle in. The ball is already rolling, and it has been rolling for a very long time. Chapter 1, Before Football, Humanity's Ancient Ball Games. 2,000 years before the First World Cup, a ball was already arcing through the air over a Chinese parade ground. The game was called cuju, which means, quite simply, kick ball, and it is the oldest form of football for which we have solid written evidence. FIFA itself officially recognizes it as the ancestor of the modern game. It first appears in Chinese records during the Warring States period, more than 2,200 years ago, in a turbulent age when rival kingdoms tore at one another and a soldier's fitness could mean the difference between life and a shallow grave. Cuju began not as play, but as training, a hard, sweating discipline meant to sharpen the agility and leg strength of fighting men. There is something quietly moving about that. The most joyful game humanity ever made was born from the grim arithmetic of war. By the time of the Han-dynasty, more than 2,000 years ago, cuju had slipped free of the barracks and into the imperial court. Emperors loved it. According to the histories, the very first Han emperor had a cuju pitch built at his palace, and the game spread outward like warmth from a fire, carrying with it laughter, gambling, and fierce local pride. Then came the Song dynasty, around 1,000 years ago, and cuju reached a golden age that feels eerily familiar. There were professional players who became celebrities, admired for their skill and grace. There were clubs. There was even a players' association, the junta, which set standards and organized matches in the great cities. Imagine the wonder of it. stadiums of cheering spectators, star athletes living on fame and fortune 1,000 years before the Premier League was ever dreamed of. But here is the part that aches a little. This brilliant, sophisticated game did not last. Under the later Ming and Qing dynasties, cuju fell out of favor, slipping from imperial splendor into disrepute, and finally into near silence. For centuries, it survived only in faded paintings and a few lines of poetry, a memory of a world that had simply moved on. It would take until our own era for scholars to dig it back out of the past and for the world to remember that football's first heartbeat was Chinese. And while cuju rose and fell in the East, on the other side of the world, other peoples were chasing their own balls across their own fields, driven by the very same restless need. In ancient Greece, they played a rough, fast game called episkyros. Two teams, usually 12 to 14 players each, faced one another across a line, scratched in the dirt, hurling and carrying a ball, straining to force their opponents back over their own boundary. It was a game of speed and cunning and bruising contact, and in Sparta, where toughness was a religion of its own, it was so violent that broken bones were not unusual. The Romans, who borrowed so much from Greece, took this game and made it harder still. They called their version harpastum, the snatched away. Played with a small, dense ball, and it left players gasping, twisting, crashing to the ground. The physician Galen praised it warmly, writing that it exercised the whole body, cost nothing, and trained the mind as much as the muscles. There is a tender detail hidden in this story. A marble carving survives from ancient Athens, more than 2,400 years old, showing a young man balancing a ball on his thigh, frozen forever in a moment of effortless skill. That single image, that small monument to a forgotten boy's grace, is so beautiful that it was later reproduced on a modern European football trophy. But honesty matters here, so let us be clear. Although the Victorians who built modern football liked to imagine a clean, unbroken line running from episkyros to harpastum to their own game, historians find no real evidence for it. These were cousins, not parents. The truth is gentler and stranger than a single bloodline. All across the ancient world, separately, again and again, human beings reached for a ball as if pulled by the same invisible thread. Far to the east, the same impulse took a gentler form, and it is worth pausing on because it reveals the other half of our nature. In Japan, a game called kemari took root well over 1,000 years ago, and it carried a completely different spirit. Where the Greeks and Romans crashed and grappled and bled, the players of kemari stood together in a soft circle and worked as one to keep a single ball aloft, never letting it fall, never competing to win. It was less a battle than a kind of moving meditation, slow and beautiful and strangely tender, a hush made visible. And there is something quietly moving in that contrast. The very same simple object, a ball, could become a brutal struggle for dominance in one land and an act of shared grace in another. The hunger football feeds is not only the hunger to conquer, it is also, just as deeply, the longing to belong, to move in harmony with others, to share a single quiet purpose under the same sky. Nowhere is that thread more haunting than in the Americas. Long before Europeans arrived, the peoples of Mesoamerica played a ball game so old that rubber balls have been found dating back roughly 3,600 years. The Olmec began it, the Maya refined it, the Aztecs perfected it, and across the region, archaeologists have found around 2,000 stone courts where it was played. The ball was solid rubber, heavy and dangerous, sometimes weighing as much as 9 pounds, and players struck it with their hips and forearms, wrapped in thick padding to survive the blows. They could not let it touch the ground. In the later versions, the goal was to drive that brutal ball through a stone ring set high on the court wall, a feat so difficult it could end a game in an instant. Yet this was never only a game, and this is where the wonder turns to dread. For the Maya and the Aztecs, the ball court was a doorway to the sacred and the terrifying. In the Maya creation story, the Popol Vuh, hero twins play the game against the very lords of the underworld. And on some carved stone panels, in certain ritual matches tied to war and the turning of the cosmos, the losing or sometimes the winning captain was put to death, his blood offered to keep the sun moving across the sky. We should be careful here, because most games were ordinary contests played for joy, not slaughter, and scholars still debate exactly who died and when. But the shadow is real. To these peoples, a ball in motion could echo the path of the sun, and a single match could carry the weight of life and death. Astonishingly, a descendant of this game, called ulama, is still played in parts of Mexico today, a living thread reaching back across thousands of years. So step back and look at what we have found. China, Greece, Rome, the great cities of Mesoamerica, all of them reaching for the same thing across oceans and centuries that kept them entirely apart. None of them copied the others. They could not have. And that tells us something profound about ourselves. Ball games keep appearing because they satisfy something buried deep in human nature. The thrill of competition, the warmth of cooperation, the fierce comfort of tribal belonging, and the ancient pull of ritual. We did not learn to love the ball. We were, it seems, always going to. Which brings us to a quieter, rougher chapter, played not in palaces or sacred courts, but in the mud of medieval Europe. Here, the game took on a wildness that the modern eye can barely believe. In England, from at least the 12th century, people played a sprawling, lawless game, now called mob football. The earliest written hint comes from around the year 1174, when a writer described young men playing ball in the fields of London. But game hardly captures it. Whole villages would surge against whole villages, sometimes hundreds of players at once, struggling to drag an inflated pig's bladder across miles of countryside to some distant marker, a church door, a mill pond, the boundary of a rival parish. There were almost no rules. There were no referees. Windows shattered, bones broke, and in the worst cases, men died. The coroner's records remember some of them by name, like a man from Middlesex struck fatally in the chest during a match in 1581, a small, sad reminder that this beloved chaos could turn deadly in a heartbeat. The authorities loathed it. As early as 1314, the Lord Mayor of London banned the game, complaining of the great uproar it caused, and over the following centuries, kings and councils tried again and again to stamp it out. Yet the people simply would not let it go. They played anyway, year after year, defying every prohibition, drawn back to the mud and the noise and the joy of it, as if to something they needed. Even now, in a handful of English towns, that ancient madness survives. In Ashbourne, in Derbyshire, the Royal Shrovetide football match still floods the streets each year, a game with roots stretching back centuries, a stubborn, thrilling echo of a wilder age. For all those long centuries, though, the game had no single shape. Every village played differently. Every region had its own customs, its own boundaries, its own beautiful confusion. There was no agreement, no shared code, nothing to bind the chaos together. It was 1,000 games wearing the same name. And it might have stayed that way forever, a folk ritual fading slowly into history, were it not for a peculiar collision of forces gathering in one small, smoky, rapidly changing country. Because what happened next did not just organize football, it set it loose upon the entire world. Chapter 2. How Britain invented modern football. The game we know today was not born on a village green. It was born in the iron and smoke of the world's first industrial nation. To understand why, picture Britain in the early 1800s, a country transforming itself faster than any society had ever changed before. Factories rose where fields had stood, cities swelled with workers drawn from the countryside, packed into narrow streets, their lives newly ruled by the clock and the machine. It was a hard, restless, overwhelming time. And in the midst of all this upheaval, a strange thing happened in the country's elite private schools, the places confusingly called public schools, institutions like Eton, Harrow, Rugby, and Charterhouse. There, the sons of the wealthy played football with a passion that bordered on obsession. But each school played its own way, and that was the problem. At some schools, you could catch the ball and run with it. At others, that was forbidden, and the game was all about the feet. When boys from different schools grew into young men and tried to play together at university, the result was bickering and confusion because no two of them agreed on what football even was. The need for a single, shared set of rules became impossible to ignore. You can almost feel the frustration of it, all that energy and love for the game tangled up in endless arguments over what was and was not allowed. The first real attempt to cut through the chaos came at Cambridge, where students drew up a set of rules around 1848, trying to find common ground. These Cambridge rules did not conquer the world overnight, but they planted a seed. And then came the moment that changed everything. On the evening of the 26th of October, 1863, a group of men gathered in a London pub called the Freemasons' Tavern. They had come to do something that sounds almost dull when you say it plainly, and yet it would ripple out across the whole planet. They had come to agree on the rules of football. The meetings were tense. The central argument was brutal in its simplicity. Should players be allowed to handle the ball and run with it? And should they be allowed to hack, to kick one another in the shins? One faction, the men who loved the rougher, carrying game, fought to keep these things. The other faction wanted them gone. In the end, the rules banned carrying the ball and banned the violence of hacking, and the men who could not accept this walked away in anger. That split, that single moment of disagreement in a smoky London room, is the reason we have two great sports today. The men who left went on toward the game we now call rugby. The men who stayed had just founded the Football Association and written the first laws of the game that would become the most popular on earth. Now here is where the deeper magic happens, and it has nothing to do with rules at all. Britain was not just any country writing down a sporting code. It was the first industrial society, and that changed everything about what football could become. The factories that swallowed people's days also, eventually, gave something back: the half-day off on Saturday. For the first time, vast numbers of ordinary working people had a sliver of free time and a little money in their pockets, and a deep, aching need for something to belong to in their grey new cities. Football rushed into that gap like water into dry ground. And then there were the railways, those great hissing arteries of iron that the industrial age had laid across the land. Suddenly, a team from one town could travel to play a team from another in a single afternoon, something utterly impossible only decades before. Competitions could be organized, crowds could gather. A man could follow his team across the country and stand shoulder to shoulder with thousands of strangers who for 90 minutes were not strangers at all, but brothers in a single roaring purpose. The factory, the free Saturday, the railway, the new crowded cities, hungry for identity. All of it came together, and football stopped being a village ritual and became a mass passion. The clubs that grew from this soil still carry the fingerprints of that industrial world. Many of the most famous teams on the planet began as humble gatherings of workers, churchgoers, and railwaymen. Manchester United started life as a team of railway workers. Arsenal began among the workers of a munitions factory in London. Liverpool, Everton, and 100 others rose from the same working-class streets, each one becoming a banner that ordinary people could rally beneath, a source of fierce local pride in lives that often offered little else. There is something deeply tender in that, in the way these struggling communities poured their hopes into a team and found, in the shared agony and ecstasy of a match, a kind of belonging that nothing else gave them. By the late 19th century, football in Britain had become something genuinely new in human history, an organized, codified, professional spectacle watched by tens of thousands, woven into the rhythm of ordinary life. The first official international match between Scotland and England had been played in 1872 and ended, fittingly, in a goalless draw watched by a few thousand curious souls. The game had a body, a set of laws, a calendar, and a roaring public. It had everything it needed to take over the world. The structures grew with astonishing speed. A knockout competition, the FA Cup, was launched in 1871, and it gave even the smallest, poorest club an intoxicating dream that on their day, against all the odds, they might topple the mighty and write their names into legend. Then the question of money forced its way in, raw and divisive. Working-class players who needed wages to feed their families collided with wealthy amateurs who insisted, with a certain comfortable ease, that the game should be played purely for love. Professionalism was bitterly resisted and then grudgingly accepted in 1885, and just 3 years later, the world's first football league was born, transforming a scatter of one-off matches into a season, a table, a long unfolding drama of hope and heartbreak that played out week after week. The shapeless folk game of the muddy fields had become a finely engineered world of its own, with champions and challengers and the slow agony of relegation built right into its bones. And that is exactly what it was about to do. Because Britain in this era was not only the world's first factory, it was also the center of the largest empire the world had ever seen, its ships and its workers reaching into nearly every corner of the globe. Britain had exported iron, coal, railways, and machines. Now, almost without meaning to, it was about to export something far more contagious. It was about to give the world its game. Chapter 3: How Football Conquered the World. Football did not march across the world behind an army. It arrived quietly in the boots of ordinary travelers. Wherever British influence reached, and in the 19th century, that meant almost everywhere, a scattering of British people came too, and they brought their game with them. Sailors kicked a ball on the docks of foreign ports. Engineers, laying railway track in distant countries, played in the evenings to pass the time. Merchants, teachers, and factory managers set up clubs in the cities where they worked. To the local people watching, this strange new game must have looked both odd and irresistible, and one by one, all over the world, they picked it up and made it their own. There is something almost dreamlike about how it spread, like a tune that someone hums once, and that everyone somehow finds themselves humming forever after. In South America, the transformation was breathtaking. British workers and schools introduced football to Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil, and these nations did not merely adopt it, they fell in love with it, body and soul, and then they changed it, pouring into it a flair and joy and inventiveness that the dour British founders had never imagined. On the dusty streets and beaches, in the poorest neighborhoods, children grew up with a ball at their feet and dreams in their chests, and the game became something close to a national religion. The first international match outside the British Isles is generally counted as Argentina against Uruguay, played in Montevideo in 1901, a sign of how quickly and how deeply the game had taken root in foreign soil. Across the ocean, the same story unfolded in Europe. British teachers and travelers helped plant football in Italy, in Spain, in the great cities of Central Europe like Vienna, Prague, and Budapest. Each country gave the game its own accent, its own style, its own meaning, until football was no longer a British export at all, but a shared inheritance of humanity. And in Africa too, the game arrived along the same routes of trade and empire, sinking into the continent so completely that today it carries some of the most passionate support found anywhere on Earth. But a world full of teams needs something to play for. And here, the story takes a decisive turn. As football spread, it became clear that someone had to organize the international game, to write shared rules across borders and decide who could play whom. So in 1904, in Paris, representatives from a handful of European nations came together to found a governing body with a long French name, the Fédération Internationale de Football Association. The world knows it by its initials, FIFA. It began with just a few member countries. Today, it has more members than the United Nations, a fact that should make you pause and feel the sheer scale of what football became. There is a delicious irony folded into this moment, and it tells you everything about football's stubborn independence. The British, who had handed the game to the world, refused at first to join the very body created to govern it. For years, the proud home nations held themselves apart, convinced they needed no committee of foreigners to tell them anything about their own invention. And they would go on to leave and rejoin more than once in the decades that followed, sulking and returning like a family that cannot quite stay away. The game had already outgrown its parents. Meanwhile, across South America, the love had grown so fierce and so fast that the continent founded its own football confederation in 1916, the oldest of its kind anywhere, binding rival nations together through a shared and burning obsession. Football was no longer something done to the world by Britain. It was something the world now owned outright, fought over, and cherished as its very own. For years, FIFA dreamed of a single tournament that could crown the best nation on Earth. And in 1930, that dream finally became real. The first World Cup was held in Uruguay, a small South American country celebrating 100 years since its first constitution and basking in the glory of its champion footballers. Only 13 teams took part, and so few European sides were willing to make the long, costly sea voyage across the Atlantic that the tournament was dominated by the Americas. But none of that dimmed the magic. In a brand new stadium in Montevideo, before a heaving, breathless crowd, the host nation Uruguay beat their great rivals Argentina 4-2, and lifted the very first World Cup trophy. Grown men wept. A whole country poured into the streets. Something new had been born, and the world could feel it. Think about what football had achieved by this point, because it is genuinely extraordinary. In a world fractured by language, by religion, by politics, by every kind of border human beings have ever invented, football had become a single, shared tongue that almost anyone could speak. You did not need to read. You did not need to be rich. You did not need to belong to the right faith or the right nation. You needed only a ball or something that could pass for one, and suddenly you could play and be understood anywhere on earth. No empire, no church, no ideology had ever managed that. A poor child in one country and a poor child in another, who shared not a single word of language, could meet on a patch of dirt and understand each other completely within seconds. That is a kind of miracle, and we have grown so used to it that we forget to be amazed. But power of that scale never stays innocent for long. Something that can unite millions, that can make a whole nation's heartbeat as one, is a force, and forces attract those who wish to use them. The men who ran the world's governments were not blind. They watched the crowds, they felt the passion rolling off the terraces, and slowly, a cold and clever idea began to take shape in their minds. If football could make people feel like one people, then football could be turned into a weapon. And in the dark, middle decades of the 20th century, that is exactly what some of history's most dangerous men set out to do. Chapter 4: Football, Politics, and National Identity. When the dictators of the 20th century looked at football, they did not see a game. They saw an opportunity. The first to truly master this dark art was Benito Mussolini, the fascist ruler of Italy. When his country hosted the Second World Cup in 1934, Mussolini understood that a triumph on the pitch could be spun into a triumph for his entire regime. He built grand new stadiums that showed off the supposed strength and modernity of fascist Italy. He turned the tournament into a spectacle of his own power, with players giving the fascist salute before matches and slogans draped across the stands. Italy won that World Cup and won again 4 years later, and the regime trumpeted these victories as proof of fascist greatness. To this day, historians argue that referees were pressured and that the competition was tilted in Italy's favor, though the full truth is tangled and fiercely debated. What is not in doubt is the chilling lesson Mussolini taught the world's strongmen, that a nation drunk on sporting glory is a nation that asks fewer questions. In Spain, another dictator learned the same lesson. General Franco, who ruled for decades after a brutal civil war, came to understand the power of the game with cold precision. The most famous club in the country, Real Madrid, rose in these years to dominate European football, winning 5 European Cups in a row, and Franco's regime basked in that glory, presenting the team's success to the world as evidence of a strong, proud, united Spain. The reality behind the image was far darker, a country gripped by repression and fear. But the football helped paint over the cracks, and there is a poignant flip side to this story. In Catalonia, the club FC Barcelona became something else entirely, a refuge for a regional identity the dictatorship tried to crush, a place where people could express who they were when so many other doors were slammed shut. In Spain, football became both the mask of the oppressor and the quiet defiance of the oppressed. Perhaps the most haunting example of all came in 1978, when Argentina hosted the World Cup while ruled by a savage military junta. This was the time of the so-called Dirty War, when the regime was kidnapping, torturing, and murdering thousands of its own people who vanished without a trace and became known as the Disappeared. The junta saw the World Cup as a chance to show the world a clean, orderly, modern Argentina and to drown out the screams with the roar of the crowd. The horror of it is almost too much to hold. At one notorious detention center, prisoners being tortured could reportedly hear the cheering from the nearby stadium, the sound of a celebrating nation drifting over the walls of their suffering. Argentina won the tournament, and a particular match, a 6-0 victory over Peru that they needed to reach the final, has been shadowed by allegations of fixing ever since, though it has never been fully proven. And yet, even here, football cut both ways. The mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, women whose children had been stolen by the regime, used the global attention of the World Cup to march and to make the world see their grief. The very stage built to hide the crimes helped expose them. Football's power did not stop at propaganda. Sometimes the passions it stirred spilled over into something even more frightening. In 1969, rising tensions between El Salvador and Honduras, two neighboring nations already strained by deep economic and political grievances, boiled over around a series of World Cup qualifying matches. Riots erupted, feeling curdled into fury, and within weeks the two countries were at war. It is true and important to say that football did not truly cause that conflict. The real roots ran deep into land disputes and migration and old wounds. But the matches became the spark, the flashpoint, the moment the pressure finally broke. People still call it the Football War, and the name carries a shiver because it shows just how much raw human emotion this game can gather and release. Why does football hold this kind of power over nations? The answer lies in something tender and a little frightening about us. A national team, wearing the colors of the flag, becomes a living symbol of the whole people, a way for millions of strangers to feel, all at once, that they are one. When that team wins, an entire country can feel lifted, proud, vindicated. When it loses, a nation can sink into shared sorrow. Governments crave that feeling because it binds people to them. And so football has been used over and over as a tool for unity, for patriotism, for propaganda, and for what we now call soft power, the quiet art of making your country admired across the world. Nations like Brazil and Argentina built their very identities partly around the beautiful game, and the joy and grief of their supporters became woven into who they are. Yet it would be wrong and unfair to leave football's bond with nations only in the bloodied hands of tyrants. For most people, in most places, the national team is something far warmer than a tool of power. It is a mirror in which a country glimpses its own soul. Brazil poured its spirit into a style so joyful and inventive that the world gave it a name of its own. Jogo Bonito, the beautiful game, and a Brazilian child learns early that to play with flair and freedom is to be truly Brazilian. A small country like Croatia, with only a few million people, can ride a single World Cup run to the final and feel an entire nation lift clean off the ground, dizzy with a pride it will remember for generations. Germany rebuilt part of its bruised post-war identity around the quiet, steady excellence of its teams. There is something deeply human and deeply tender in all of this, in the way a flag and a shirt can carry the hopes of millions. For better and for worse, football has become one of the most powerful ways a people tells the world and tells itself who it believes it truly is. But to focus only on dictators and wars is to miss the deepest mystery of all. Because long before any government thought to exploit football, the game had already taken hold of something far more intimate and far more powerful than any state. It had taken hold of the individual human heart. To understand football's true power, we have to stop looking at maps and parliaments and start looking inward at the strange, ancient machinery of the human mind itself. Chapter 5. Why Humans Become Football Fanatics. There is a question that haunts anyone who has ever watched a grown adult weep over a game. Why does it matter so much? Why do millions of otherwise sensible people arrange their whole week around a match? Why do they cry when their team loses, as if struck by real grief? Why do they stay loyal to one club for their entire lives through decades of disappointment and feel a flare of genuine dislike toward the supporters of a rival team they have never met? Why do they pass this devotion down to their children, like an heirloom, like a faith? The answer, it turns out, is written deep in our evolutionary past, in instincts far older than the game itself. For almost the whole of human history, our ancestors lived in small groups, and belonging to a group was not a comfort, but a matter of survival. To be inside the tribe was to be protected, fed, and safe. To be cast out was very often to die. So evolution shaped us, over countless generations, to crave belonging, with a hunger as deep as the hunger for food. It taught us to bond fiercely with our own group, and to grow wary, even hostile, toward outsiders. That ancient instinct never left us. It still hums beneath everything we do. And football, more than almost anything else in modern life, reaches down and switches it on. When you pull on your team's colors and stand among thousands singing the same song, some old part of your brain stops seeing a stadium and starts seeing a tribe. The warmth you feel is real, and it is ancient. Scientists who study the brain have watched this happen. When a fan's team scores, the brain releases dopamine, the chemical of reward and pleasure, the same surge that drives so many of our deepest desires. Because goals in football are so rare and so hard-won, each one lands like a small explosion of joy, an ecstasy made sharper by the long agony of waiting. And when fans gather and bond, the brain releases oxytocin, the chemical of connection and trust, the very same one that flows between close friends and within families. This is why a crowd of strangers can feel, in a single shared moment, like kin. Psychologists describe a phenomenon they call basking in reflected glory, the way we say, "We won," when our team triumphs, claiming the victory as our own, and yet so often say they lost when it falls apart, holding the defeat at arm's length. It is a small linguistic trick, but it reveals something profound. When we love a team, its triumphs become our triumphs, and its identity becomes part of who we are. Once you see football through this lens, a startling resemblance comes into focus, one that has fascinated thinkers for a long time. In so many ways, football behaves like a religion. Consider the echoes, a great stadium where the faithful gather in their tens of thousands can feel like a vast cathedral, humming with devotion. The star players, gifted and adored, are treated like living saints, their images worn on backs and hung on walls. The journey to an away match, the long pilgrimage to a distant ground to stand with your people, carries the weight of a sacred quest. And the club songs, those anthems that thousands sing together with tears in their eyes and arms around shoulders, are nothing less than hymns. We should be careful and honest here. Football is not literally a religion, and most fans would never confuse the two. But the comparison endures because both reach for the very same deep human needs: the need to belong, the need for ritual, the need for something larger than yourself to pour your heart into. There is an even stranger layer to this, hidden in the wiring of the brain itself. Researchers believe that special cells, called mirror neurons, help us feel, inside our own bodies, the actions we are only watching. When your hero surges down the wing and strikes the ball, some faint echo of that very motion fires within you too, as though, for a single heartbeat, you were the one who scored. This is why you leap from your seat without deciding to, why your muscles tense and your breath catches and your heart pounds, why you stagger out of a match, drained and elated even though you never touched the ball. You are not a passive spectator at all. Some hidden part of you is out there on the grass, living and straining and soaring with every player you love, sharing their triumph as if it were carved into your own flesh. The wall between watching and doing quietly dissolves. And that, perhaps, is the most intimate magic the game holds. And this is where the rivalries come from. The fierce, sometimes ugly hatreds that can flare between rival sets of supporters. At their most extreme, this devotion hardens into the world of the hardcore fan groups, the hooligans and the ultras, for whom the team becomes so fused with their own identity that an insult to the club feels like an insult to the self, and a threat to the tribe feels like a threat to their very being. Most fans never come close to violence, of course, but the same ancient machinery that fills a stadium with joy and belonging can, in a darker key, fill it with menace. The instinct that once kept our ancestors alive by binding them to their group and turning them against outsiders is a double-edged thing. And football, which lights that instinct so brightly, lights both edges at once. So here is the quiet, astonishing truth at the heart of football's hold on us. The game did not create these feelings, it found them, already waiting inside us, carved into our nature across hundreds of thousands of years of living and dying in groups. Football is so powerful, not because it invented something new, but because it speaks directly to something unimaginably old. It gives our ancient tribal hearts a tribe to love, a ritual to follow, heroes to worship, and rivals to define ourselves against. All of it made safe, more or less, and bottled into 90 minutes on a Saturday afternoon. And once you understand a force that powerful, that universal, that woven into the human soul, one more question becomes impossible to ignore. What happens when someone works out how to put a price on it? Because the same passion that fills our hearts would in time come to fill something else entirely. It would build one of the largest fortunes in the history of the world. Chapter 6. The Billion-Dollar Empire. The same game that began with workers kicking a ball on a Saturday afternoon is now worth more money than many entire nations produce. For most of its history, football was not really about money at all. It was a passion, a pastime, a thing of the streets and the terraces. The shift, when it came, was driven by an invention that changed almost everything about modern life: television. As cameras began to carry matches into living rooms across the world, football's audience exploded beyond anything the old stadiums could hold. Suddenly, a single game could be watched by millions, then tens of millions, then hundreds of millions, and where there are audiences that vast, there is money, almost unimaginable money, waiting to be made. Broadcasters began paying enormous sums for the right to show matches, and that river of cash transformed the game forever. Nowhere did this transformation run deeper than in England, where the old top division was relaunched in 1992 as the Premier League, built from the ground up to capture the new world of television money. The gamble worked beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Today, the Premier League sells the rights to broadcast its matches for staggering sums, with deals worth several billion pounds over just a few years, beamed into homes in nearly every country on Earth. Alongside it rose the Champions League, the glittering European competition that brings the continent's greatest clubs together under bright lights, watched by an audience so large it defies comprehension. Football had become not just a sport, but one of the most valuable forms of entertainment ever created. And broadcasting was only the source of the river, not the whole of it. Around the televised game, there grew an entire economy, vast and intricate and hungry, all of it feeding on the very same devotion. There was sponsorship, as some of the world's largest companies paid breathtaking sums to stitch their names across famous shirts and stadium walls, buying a place in the affections of millions. There was merchandising, as fans bought replica kits and scarves and badges, wearing their loyalty proudly on their backs and turning pure love into endless sales. There was tourism, as supporters saved for years and traveled across oceans to make a pilgrimage to a famous ground. And there was gambling, a long shadow stretching alongside the game, as staggering sums were wagered on every result, binding money ever more tightly to every single kick. Each strand fed the others, swelling and tangling together, until football was no longer simply a sport with some money attached to it. It had become a sprawling industry in which the match itself was only the glowing heart, ringed about by a machine of almost unimaginable size. With money came a new and dizzying market, the buying and selling of players themselves. Clubs began paying transfer fees to lure star players from one another, and those fees climbed and climbed until they reached heights that feel almost surreal. The current record was set in 2017, when the French club Paris Saint-Germain paid €222 million for the Brazilian forward Neymar, a sum so vast that one writer pointed out you could buy several passenger aircraft for the same price. Let that settle for a moment. A single human being, valued at the cost of a small fleet of planes, all because of what he could do with a ball at his feet. The wages, too, soared into the stratosphere, until the best players earned more in a week than most people earn in years, and a fortunate few crossed into a wealth once reserved for kings. As the money grew, so did the kind of people drawn to own football clubs. Where once a club might belong to a local businessman or its own supporters, now billionaires and even nations began to buy them, treating these beloved institutions as trophies and investments. And in recent years, a new and controversial force has entered the game: the immense wealth of certain Gulf states. Saudi Arabia, through its enormous public investment fund, has poured money into football, buying the English club Newcastle United, taking control of clubs in its own domestic league, and luring some of the world's most famous players with astonishing salaries. One superstar's contract there was reported to make him the first footballer in history to earn $1 billion, a figure that would have seemed like fantasy only a generation ago. This has stirred a fierce and important debate gathered around a single sharp word: sportswashing. Critics argue that states with troubling records on human rights use the glamour and goodwill of football to polish their image on the world stage, to draw the eyes of the world towards stadiums and stars and away from harder questions. Defenders point to investment, jobs, and the genuine love of the game, and note that the word itself is slippery and often aimed selectively, We do not need to settle that argument tonight, but it is worth sitting with the strangeness of it, with a quiet unease. A game born among factory workers, a game that once cost nothing but a pig's bladder and a patch of open ground, has become so powerful, so beloved, so universally watched, that nations now compete to own a piece of its magic and bend its glow toward their own ends. And just when it seemed that money might finally swallow the game whole, something happened that revealed where the real power has been hiding all along. In 2021, a handful of Europe's richest and most famous clubs tried to break away and form a closed, exclusive competition they called the Super League, a scheme designed to lock in their wealth and their status forever, sealing the door behind them. It was built by billionaires and lawyers, armored with enormous finance, and at first it looked utterly unstoppable. And then the fans rose up. Ordinary supporters poured into the streets in raw fury, massing outside stadiums, roaring with one voice that the game belonged to them and not to the accountants and the owners. Within just a few days, the whole glittering scheme collapsed in humiliation and was gone. It was a stunning, thrilling reminder, and one worth holding close, that for all the billions, football's true owners are still, in the end, the people who love it. Strip away the passion, and there is simply nothing left to sell. That is the measure of how far football has traveled. From the kick of a soldier in ancient China, from a pig's bladder dragged through medieval mud, from a rough game written down in a London pub, it has grown into a global business worth hundreds of billions, one of the largest and most influential industries the world has ever known. And the most remarkable thing is that for all the money, for all the billionaires and broadcasters and grand corporate machinery, the thing that makes it valuable is still exactly what it always was. It is still the feeling in your chest when the ball hits the net. The empire is built, in the end, on the beating of the human heart. Conclusion. So let us return, at the last, to the question we began with. How did a simple game become one of humanity's most powerful institutions? We have traveled a long way to find the answer, across thousands of years and around the entire world. We have watched it survive things that destroyed empires and toppled kingdoms. Football lived through the fall of dynasties in China and the collapse of civilizations in the Americas. It outlasted the chaos of the Middle Ages and the bans of angry kings. It endured 2 world wars, the rise and ruin of dictators, the coming of television, and the vast churning forces of globalization that have swept away so much else. Through all of it, the ball kept rolling. Wars could not stop it. Revolutions could not stop it. Even those who tried to twist it to their own dark ends could not, in the end, possess it. It simply kept being passed, from foot to foot, from generation to generation, refusing to die. And the reason for that endurance is the gentlest secret of all. Football is not really about the ball. It never was. It is about something far older and far deeper than any game. Across all of human history, in every land and every age, people have needed the same handful of things to feel whole. We have needed tribes to belong to. We have needed stories to tell. We have needed heroes to look up to, rituals to mark the passing of our days, and the warm, irreplaceable feeling of belonging to something larger than ourselves. For most of history, those needs were met by the village, the clan, the faith, the shared struggle to survive. But the modern world, for all its gifts, scattered us into cities of strangers and loosened the old bonds. And into that quiet hunger, football arrived, offering all of those ancient things at once, wrapped up in 90 minutes and a patch of green. That is why it conquered the world. Not because of money, though the money is vast. Not because of politics, though the politics is real. It conquered the world because it gives us, all of us, the things our hearts were shaped to need, and it does so in a language that requires no translation, that asks nothing of your wealth or your faith or your nation, only that you love the game. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about football is not that billions of people love it. It is that, in a world divided by language and religion and politics, split by every border we have ever drawn, humanity somehow, quietly without ever meaning to, agreed on one universal game. If this story found its way in today and left you seeing this familiar game with new eyes, consider subscribing to Forming Knowledge quietly and gently tap the like button before you go. We have many more stories of football waiting in the weeks ahead, each one a closer look at a corner of this vast and beautiful history. Rest well. The ball will still be rolling when you wake.